Hilchos Nedarim, Perek Revi, the Laws of Vows, Chapter 4. Today we're going to cover, first of all, 4 types of vows that are technically permitted to make. Still, you shouldn't do them purposely, but if you made them, they're not really binding. And then we're going to get into the laws of Hataras Nedarim, the release of vows. Every year on the day before Rosh Hashanah, everybody gets up and we rotate, and everyone says a paragraph to release all the vows for the past year. So that's more of a ceremonial thing that we do once a year, but technically in Jewish law, if you made a vow and during the year you realized that it was getting in the way of your life, or some new circumstance came up, as we'll see the details of it, you're allowed to go to a sage and get your vow released. So that's going to be the 2 topics of today's chapter. And just, again, there's some background noise, so we'll forgive that, because we know that we're learning Torah for ourselves. It says the Rambam Halacha Aleph, Nidrei Oinsin, vows made under duress. Hey, the IRS comes to your house, banging down your door. They tell you, we believe you have some things in your house that need to be taxed. And you say, no, I don't. So they say, take a vow. Take a vow that you don't have it. And let's say it wasn't exactly the IRS, because the IRS would be more lawful, but let's say it was an unlawful tax collector. You're allowed to swear under duress in a false way, and it's okay. V'nidreish gagos, inadvertent vows that Rambam is going to define later in chapter 8. Let's say somebody takes a vow, he says, you know what? I'm not going to let my wife benefit from me anymore because I heard that she hit our kid. And then it turns out that it was false. So that was a vow made under a false pretense. So that's called nidreish gagos, inadvertent vows. The nidrei havai, vows of exaggeration. We had a similar concept when it came to oaths. A guy says, I swear or I vow that I saw an army as big as the Jews that left Egypt. Obviously he's exaggerating. But the point is, he wanted to bring out the greatness of the size of the army. So in these cases, all these vows, hari'elu mutarim, they're all permitted. Kedarach shebe'arnu b'shvuah is the same way that we explained when it came to oaths. Now that Rambam goes in detail into each category and defines them. Let's say a terrorist or an unlawful tax collector puts you under a vow. And they tell the person, we don't believe that you're holding untaxable things. If it's true what you're saying, substantiate your word by a vow. Swear to us that meat will be forbidden to you if you have something which is liable to taxes. And the guy, he may have those objects, but he knows that it's unlawful tax collection. So he takes the vow and he says, you know what? Not only is meat going to be forbidden, but bread and meat and wine will all be forbidden to me. So he's permitted to enjoy everything. Even though he voluntarily added more items to be forbidden, since the context of the vow was a vow under duress, so it's not binding. Similarly, if a tax collector said, you know what, if we don't believe you, but if you want to substantiate your words, take a vow that your wife will never have benefit from you. He's trying to show that he's saying the truth, because you know what, I take a vow, not only my wife, but my kids, my brothers, nobody will have benefit from me if what I'm saying is not true. Since the whole vow was made under duress, kulan mutarim, they're all permitted. They're all permitted to have benefit from him. Same thing in all similar cases. Because the vow was made under duress, it's allowed. Now that Rambam says, however, as another measure, in all these vows, where you know you're making a false vow, in your mind, you have to have in mind some kind of caveat, qualification, that will make the vow more permissible. For example, in your mind, when the guy says, swear that you won't eat meat ever, so you should have in mind, I'm not going to eat meat today or for the next hour. So in your head, you've already limited the vow. Something like that. And in this case, you can rely on that which you have in mind. Since in this moment you're under duress and you can't express it verbally, so it's okay to rely on this little trick in your mind. Mental conversation. And when you do that, what happens is, now your mind and your mouth are not aligned. As we explained in the laws of oaths. And when your mind and your mouth are not aligned, the whole vow is out the window. So those are the first categories, the vow under duress. We also mentioned the vow of exaggeration. You say, I saw a wall this high, and obviously it's not that high. The point is, it's there to make to bring out a point. And now we have a fourth category that is only true of vows, not oaths. Vows of motivation. Here. Vows of motivation are also permitted. What's a vow of motivation? A vow of motivation is where you take a vow just to bring out a point, but not because you're actually serious. Ketzad. The Rambam gives two examples. What does this look like? Number one, I've been trying to host you for Shabbos dinner for the longest time. At one point, you keep on turning down the invitations. I say, you know what, Philip, you're under vow. You're coming to me for Shabbos dinner. Now, you don't want to trouble me. So what do you say? You respond back with a vow. I vow I'm never going to eat in your house. Because you don't want to bother me. So now we've both made a vow just as a motivator. You come to my house. No, I'm not coming to your house. Nobody meant to seriously take a vow. So bein achal, bein lo achal, whether you ended up coming to my house to eat, you didn't come to my house to eat, shneim pturim, we're both exempt. V'chein, similarly, a second case. This might be a little more practical to understand. Hamoicher, you have a guy's bargaining, okay, in the shuk. He's trying to buy something. Hamoicher shenadar, so the seller takes a vow, shelo yimker chefet zeh ela b'sela. I take a vow, I'm not selling this object for less than $100. V'halekeach nadar, shelo yikachenu ela b'shekel. Comes the buyer, says, you know what, I take a vow, I'm not buying it for more than 50. So they're just trying to get to a bargain, obviously. If as a result of these two vows, they say, you know what, let's call it 75. Right? So the seller said, I vow, he promised, no less than 100. He said, I vow no more than 50. But if they meet at 75, it's okay. Shneim pturim, they're both exempt. Anything like this is the same law. Neither one conclusively decided something in his heart. He only vowed to motivate the other guy, to egg him on to see what's going to happen. He never decided in his heart. Now, this only works by vows where you don't say Hashem's name. When it comes to oath, you say Hashem's name, you can't, just use Hashem's name in vain. So you can't do oaths of motivation. That doesn't work. A vow you can do. Halacha Dalit says the Rambam, even though these four types of vows are permitted, uminayin, how do we know? Even these four types of vows that are permitted, and a person still is forbidden to make the vows purposely in mind to cancel them. It says in the Torah about the vow, don't desecrate your word, which means don't purposely desecrate your word, make it mundane. Here, you're saying a vow and you're going to end up canceling it because it's not serious. So you're really transgressing, making your words chulin, making your words inconsequential. So therefore you shouldn't do that. And now we move on to the halachas of hataras nedarim, release of vows. It says that a person made a vow and regrets the vow. He can go to a sage, ask for a release, and get it released. The laws of release of vows is the same as the release of oaths. Namely, only an expert sage can release the vow, or at least 3 ordinary men if there's no sage. The same language used to release an oath. Mutar lach or machul lach, as we had in chapter 6 of the laws of oaths. Those are the same languages that we employ to release a vow. And similarly, all the other topics which we expressed or explained. When it came to oaths, they all apply to vows the same way they apply to oaths. Another thing, you can only release an oath once it takes effect. Kishvua, like an oath. Sorry, you can only release a vow once it takes effect, like an oath. For example, a guy says, today is the 5th of Adar, right? A guy says, you know what? Starting in 3 weeks from now, I'm not going to eat meat for a month. So now the vow only takes effect in 3 weeks. So you cannot release the vow today. You can only release the vow once it takes effect. The same way we can ask for a release when it comes to vows of prohibition and release it. So too you can ask for a release of consecration vows, where you promise to bring a sacrifice and you can release it. Whether you vow to bring something for the temple upkeep or to bring something on the altar, all sacrifices are allowed to be released. With one exception. Tmura means exchange. We're going to have a whole set of laws on this in the 9th book of the Rambam. But essentially what it means is if you have an animal that you dedicated to a sacrifice, you're not allowed to transfer that holiness to another animal. You can say, you know what, I changed my mind, I want to bring, even if it's better. You cannot change an animal. If you do, the halacha is, v'hayahu utmurato yiyeh kodesh, both the original animal and the exchange both become holy. So the Rambam says, if you create a second animal to be holy via exchange, even though it's forbidden, but it becomes holy, this holiness can never be released. The initial one can be undone. But once you pass over the exchange,
then they both can't be undone.
the second one can't be undone.
The second one can't.
Yes. Commentaries say if you undo the first one, it'll undo both of them as a matter of course. But as the second one alone, you cannot release. Halacha ches, ukeshem sheha'avai habal meifer nidrei isra, the same way the father and a husband have power to revoke their daughters or their wives' vows of prohibition, as we're going to explore at length in chapters 11 to 13. But the Rambam just gives a general principle here. A father and a husband have the power to revoke vows of prohibitions. Kach meifer nidrei hekdeshois, hadoimin nidrei ha'isra, they can also revoke vows of consecration that are similar to vows of prohibition. Halacha tes, how does release of oaths work when it comes to a matfis, a person who attaches himself? We saw the other day that if you hear a friend making a vow, you can say me too, and you become attached to the vow. How does release work in that way? Misha nadar, a person makes an oath, here's the guy on the right, he makes an oath, this bread is forbidden to me. V'shama chaveirei v'amar va'ani, v'shama shlishi v'amar va'ani. A second guy here says me too, third guy says me too, v'nishal harishain al nidrei. The first guy goes to a sage to release his vow, v'hutar, and it was released, hutru kulan. All the other ones are also released because they all depend on his vow. Nishala acharin v'hutar, but if only the last guy asked for a release and he was released, ha'acharin mutar v'kulan asurin, only the last guy is released, everyone else is still forbidden. Nishala sheni v'hutar, if the middle guy, number 2, asks for a petition and releases his vow, hasheni v'shal acharav mutarin, him and the next one are permitted, the harishain asur, but the first one is still forbidden because he doesn't depend on the second vow. Halacha yud v'chein amatvis dvarim harbe baneder. Same thing would apply if somebody attached multiple things into a vow, not just multiple people, multiple things. Kegoyin shenadar ala pas v'hitfis habasar. He makes a vow on bread and then he attaches the meat. He says the meat should be like the bread. V'nishal al hapas v'hutar ba. If he asks a sage for a release about the bread and he is indeed released, hutar habasar, the meat which was dependent on it, also becomes released. Nishal ala basar v'hutar bay, but if he only asks for the meat to be released and that's released, lehutar apas, the bread has not been released because it's the initial vow, not the dependent vow. Halacha yud aleph hanishba oy hanoider. A person is talking to a bunch of people and he takes an oath or a vow and he says, she'eni nehene lekulchem. I'm not going to have benefit from all of you. V'nishal al nidroi oy al shvuasei al echad mehem. And in the end, he needs to have benefit from one of the guys. So he goes to a sage to release one of the guys' permission. And he gets a release. Hutru kulam, they all become released. Shahaneder shahutar miklale hutar kule. We have a rule that if a vow is partially released, it's completely released. Your initial intention was to have them all be forbidden. Now you're undoing one, you undo them all. Amar, but if initially when he formulated the vow, he said, She'eni nehene lazeh v'lazeh v'lazeh, I'm not going to have benefit to this guy, nor to that guy, nor to that guy. And he uses the word, the vav, in between. This one, and this one, and this one. So the Rambam says that's like making a bunch of people dependent one on another. Hutar harisha and hutru kulan. With the first guy he pointed to becomes released, they're all released. Hutar acharain ha'acharain mutar v'kulan asurim. But if only the last guy is released, only he's released, and everyone else is still forbidden. She'eni nehenen lazeh, lazeh, lazeh. Doesn't work so well in English, but if you would say, I'm not going to have benefit this guy, this guy, this guy. You didn't use the word and. So they're each individual vows. Each one needs to have an opening to be released on its own. None of them are interlinked, and none of them will release each other. And the same thing would apply in any other similar case. Halacha Yud Beis nadar benazir uvekarban uveshvua. A person makes a vow all at once. He's going to be a Nazirite, bring a sacrifice, and make some kind of an oath. Or he made a vow. He doesn't remember which category it was. Since it's all one big umbrella, Pesach echad lekulan, one opening is required for them all. One opening releases them all. Halacha Yud Gimel hanoider me anshe ha'ir. A person makes a vow, he's not going to have any benefit from anybody in the city. Now he needs to have his vow released. So who do you go to? The rabbi in the city. V'nishal lechacham sheba'ir, and he goes to petition the sage in the city. Is that called benefiting or not? Or he made a much more encompassing vow. He says, you know what, I'm not going to have any benefit from any Jew. Now he needs a sage to release the vow. He goes to a sage to release it. It's funny, because the mechanism is that the oath is totally released, so it's not considered retroactively as having benefit. And therefore you can use the sage in your own city or the sage in the Jewish people to release the vow against not having benefit from people in the city or the Jewish people. Halacha Yudalad ha'omer, a person says, Peiros elu asurin alai hayoim. These grapes are going to be forbidden to me today. In elich lemachar lemakom pleini, if I visit New York tomorrow. So the action is tomorrow and the prohibition is today. Says the Rambam, hareza asur la'achlam hayoim. We have to worry, maybe he's going to go tomorrow to New York. So already today the grapes are forbidden. As a decree, perhaps he's going to go tomorrow to that place. If you transgressed, you didn't listen to the sage's advice, and you ate them today, and indeed the next day you visited New York, you get lashes. And if you didn't go, good for you. You don't get lashes because you didn't transgress your vow. What if it was the opposite? Omar, he said, these grapes are going to be forbidden to me tomorrow if I visit New York today. So now, that's totally fine. Travel to New York if you want today. And indeed, the next day, the fruit will become forbidden. Anything like that, that's okay. How come we're not worried over here that you're going to eat the grapes tomorrow? Because once the grapes will be forbidden, a person is careful about forbidden things not to do it. But he isn't as careful with conditions that can cause permitted things to be forbidden. So if he ate the grapes today, he may visit New York the next day. If he visited New York today, he won't eat the grapes tomorrow. A person is inspired, he wants to do some kind of tshuva, so he makes a vow, he's going to fast for 10 days. But he gets to pick which 10 days. And on a given day he was fasting, and in the middle of the day he realizes he has to go to a bris, some kind of mitzvah feast. Or there's a big rabbi coming to town, he has to go and be part of his feast. You're allowed to eat in the middle of your fast day, and pay it back with a different day. Because you never set the days in the beginning. You can choose which days it is. So today you started fasting, you ate in the middle, okay, let it go, it's not one of the days. Pick it up tomorrow. But if a person makes a vow that he's going to fast today, so he's labeled the day, and he forgets and eats in the middle of the day, he must keep on fasting. This is applicable even today in the public Jewish fast days. If you by mistake eat in the middle of the day, it's not a license to go and keep on eating. You got to go back and fast. If a person makes a vow he's going to fast for 1 or 2 days, and when he begins fasting he forgets to eat. So the first case was he purposely went to go violate his fast for a sudas mitzvah. Here he just forgets and he eats in the middle of nisai. He's lost the fast. He promised to fast for a day, not today, a day. If you didn't finish a day, you got to finish a day a different time. The chayav latzum yom acher, you have to go back and make it up by fasting on a different day.